Hello again, and welcome back to the Departure Lounge. I'm going to get myself in trouble by saying this because I'm about to say that the next person that I'm having a conversation with is one of my favorites. The reason I'm going to get in trouble is because everyone that I'm talking to is one of my favorites. But Jerry, you and I go back a long ways. And so I just love that we keep continuing to have opportunities to chat about topics related to leaving well. I'll give my own intro of our past relationship. We met when we were both living overseas outside of the United States. And Jerry has a blog called The Culture Blend, which it became such an incredible piece of our journey and our family's life abroad, namely that Jerry taught me how to leave well and leave well in a physical way as we navigated different places abroad, living in India and Singapore. Jerry and I both and our families have now repatriated back to the States, and we found ways to work together even still. And so it's really good to have you join me. Can you talk a little bit, Jerry, about you and what you love to do?
Yeah. Well, you're one of my favorites too, as well, Naomi. Just humans, and I mean, yeah, everybody's my favorite, but I'll put you in that category. Yeah, really good to be with you, and I love this conversation. I love what you're doing. So my background, as you mentioned, I lived overseas. I lived in China for about 15 years, off and on. Did a lot of work around Asia, throughout the Middle East, and just really kind of got lost and infatuated by the idea of culture and all of the transitions that we go through, like this transition that never stops. We think about it as, moving to one place. And I think when I read your stuff as well, like I'm a triangle, and that kind of broke open for me this idea that there's a lot more to transition than just the initial move, right? Like there's everything that happens in between, and then there is, of course, the departure. And so I got to spend some time with an organization who valued that, and we actually built some things around helping people to leave well, and that was a highlight of my experience there.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that we're going to talk about, and we actually don't ever know what we're going to talk about. We kind of throw in a topic to guide us a little bit, and then the two of us just chat. One of the things I would like to talk to you about, Jerry, as we start is the responsibility that we have to be equitable when we're thinking about departures. And then maybe there's some pieces in there to start talking about the culture that we enter in organizations and the culture that we all are also bringing in. If you want to riff on that for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's a hard conversation, isn't it? Like anytime we get into the equity conversation, it becomes a challenging conversation. And I think because there's multiple factors to that. And when you combine all of those, when you combine nonprofits and like all of the dynamics that go into that, and then you add to it the leaving piece, which is the least talked about piece of an entire life cycle, employee or volunteer, or whatever that is. It just doesn't get talked about because we don't think about it, right? Like we think about it in terms of, oh, this person's leaving, that's sad, or oh, that's a big deal, it's not a big deal, whatever it is. But we don't think about it in the same terms or with the same weight that we talk about incoming or even any part of the life cycle, right? And so, and what we love to do, I think, is like it's so much easier to talk in terms, and we see this in our culture, especially right now, to talk in terms of equality, right? Like if we can get the same pieces in motion, then everything's good, right? Everybody gets the same treatment, and we don't take into consideration the equity piece, which is we're not all starting from the same place. Like I got to work with a DEI firm for about 5 years when we came back to the States, and one of the things that broke it open for me, which I was the outlier in the firm as a straight white American male in DEI. And so I'm so thankful for that opportunity. One of the things that broke the idea open for me was just, and this is overused, and but somebody out there hasn't heard it yet, but just the idea of a monopoly board, right? Like, and that's built on equality. The same rules apply to all of us. We all get the same money when we pass go. We all run the same risks. We can all buy the same properties. that's equality. Equity is like, okay, let's play a game, but I get to go around the board 3 times before you even start. Now you have the same rules as me. So hey, that's equality, right? But the reality is that as you go around the board, I've already bought up all the properties. And so every trip around the board, you're losing more, I'm gaining more. That's equity. And that's a hard conversation to have. And so we ignore it.
Yeah. I also think as you were talking, Jerry, what came up in my mind was so often what happens, especially in organizations where the founder is leaving, but it's in any situation.
Yeah.
Where they are walking out the door with their set of held identities. And then the board thinks it's a good idea to bring in someone that shares none of those same identities.
Yep,
And they
yep.
bring in this
Instead of the
person
other way.
in the lens of we're being equitable. And then the board has no idea how to actually navigate the fact that it's
Yeah.
two remarkably different humans. And that's, I mean, I'm being very dramatic when I say none of the same identities, but to your point of straight, white, American, male, you could
Right.
add religious preferences, you could add all sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so often there's a disabled, like there's so many things. Do you have thoughts around maybe something you've seen in your work or just your general ideas around how we can be better when we're bringing in someone who's got a different set of realities and lived experience?
Yeah, and I think you're speaking to something that is just really critical because we get lost in our thinking when there's a transition, right? Like we are never the best version of ourselves in the middle of transition, and that applies to individuals, it applies to teams, it applies to boards, it applies to anyone in the group. And so a lot of times what we will do is take a look at the last person going out, and we'll either want to match them, so find somebody who's as close to them as possible, or we'll want to say, no, we need something different now. It's time for a fresh start. And so we find someone and we try to line up, whether it's demographics or personality or whatever it is, and we bring people in based on those factors. And that's a misguided way to do it, because then we're really setting ourselves up for disappointment, because we have a preconceived idea of what this person is going to be able to do, based on the comparison between the two of them, and almost never live up to those expectations, right?
Yeah.
So we set ourselves up for failure, we set them up for failure. It's just a really challenging way to look at it. And I think like one thing to combat that is just the multiplicity of voices that you have involved in that decision, right? Like you've got to gather the insight and the wisdom from anybody that you have access to before you make that decision, because it should be intentional. And I love this conversation. It's like, what is the opposite of intentionality? What would you say? Like, what comes to mind first off? And the only wrong answer is unintentional, right? Like that's just too easy.
What comes to mind quickly is rushed.
Rushed, yeah, absolutely. And so this is my like that absolutely is right. There's a lot of really true answers. My favorite is natural, right? So when you rush natural, what comes out, you make whatever decision is packed in there, right? And the idea is that if you're not intentional, you don't have to do anything, right? Like you're just going to do whatever comes naturally, and that's where inequity grows, right? Like that's why inequity happens, because we hired based on what was already packed into us without bringing in the voices around us and the collective wisdom of someone else to make a more informed decision.
Yeah. I want to pivot just a little bit, but not too greatly. You and I, in the past, have led a full day retreat for organizations that were all grantees for a funder. And in it, you led an exercise around basically culture and communication, and how if we don't know where the other person's coming from, it's really hard to communicate. Could you, I know it's going to be, we can't really do the exercise, but can you share a little bit about that and why that comes into play so importantly with the way that we navigate departures and transitions?
Right. Yeah. I forget who said it. I always quote this and I quote it wrong. And then I forget who said it, but it's a powerful statement. It's like the greatest misconception about communication is that it has happened, right?
Mm.
Like I'll look it up. You can Google it, but that's kind of the reality, right? Like that exists in relationships. It exists between friends, but it's exaggerated when there are lines of difference between us. And because we communicate in different ways, we say the same words and mean different things, but that doesn't register on both sides. We think that we're talking about the same thing. And so anytime that there's um, a cultural gap between two sides and we're trying to communicate, we've got to apply that intentionality even more so. We've got to back up and say, okay, are we saying the same thing, and track that out 2 or 3 layers in to make sure that we're actually tracking and saying what we think we're saying. Otherwise, we're going to make decisions based on assumed agreement that isn't actually there, and that gets really dangerous. And again, that's what inflates the whole idea of unfairness. That's where unfair decisions get made. I think communication is a key issue, and is a thing all of its own, right? Like it's a different level of miscommunication and danger that happens. Yeah. Oh, I think you're on mute.
I did mute myself. I muted myself because I was typing. I didn't want the keyboard clicking, clacking, because I was looking up who
You were looking it up. Who said it?
And it was George Bernard Shaw, apparently.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. In the exercise that Jerry led us through, what we did was paired up people and we asked them to communicate, but only using nods of yes or shaking their heads of no. And they were trying to guess the country that their pair partner had identified. And then Jerry flipped the script. That was a pretty easy example. And then he flipped the script and said, now, when you say yes, you have to shake your head no. And when you mean no, you have to shake your head yes. And I think that's what happens in organizations over and over and over, is that we aren't all speaking the same language. Sometimes our organizations, it's literal that we're not speaking the same language. So it just further messes us up when we're trying to be equitable.
Yeah, and this was an exercise that we used in the DEI firm that I worked in, and it really illustrates, like if you pause and think about it in the debrief, you get down into systems, right? Like I have a system that says this means yes and this means no. And when I upset that system, when I try to do something differently, then there are all of these things that you have to put in place. It takes more time. We have to think about it more. We have to create new systems in our mind. And we can't always speak about that. We don't always have the resources to do that. And so it digs down into our systems that are ingrained, right?
Yeah. One of the other things, Jerry, I'd love your insights in a chat about is that typically in the nonprofit space, we really prioritize the executive director, the CEO, other C-suite level titles for searches. And then we kind of just forget about the team, the staff, the frontline folks, the outreach workers, the program folks. Is there any maybe either hard conversation or direct, candid feedback you want to give to folks around that, or just we could even just have a chat about that reality?
Yeah. And I think you could even go a layer deeper, even in that executive director, CEO departure, like that changes from organization to organization, right? Like if you've got the founder who has been there for 30 years and kind of is synonymous with the organization or the brand or whatever it is, they get the fanfare in the departure. They get the cake and the parade and the little short videos from everybody saying about how much they're going to be missed. Whereas the next person who comes in doesn't carry that same weight. And so it even applies at that level. But then if you trickle that down into the organization, we don't hold all departures with the same weight. And again, I think that goes back to that happens, and it happens more when you haven't thought about it before the departure comes, right? Like and this is why I love the work that you're doing. Like you're working with organizations to say, hey, think about this before you have to think about it. Do it now. Yeah, you don't have to think about it right now. You don't, everything's fine. This is absolutely the time to prepare for that. So ask yourself those questions. How do we send people off? How do we help them to leave well? How do we support their process? Because leaving is not an event. It is a process, right?
Yeah.
Like there's this time that leads up to it. There's the actual departure date, and then there's a time on the other end of it where they're readjusting and where the organization readjusts to their absence. But thinking about those things when you don't have to is absolutely critical to not only supporting them, but it's good for the
Yeah.
organization as well, right? Like every time somebody leaves, there's a hole there, there's a gap, and sometimes that's a big one, and sometimes it's a small one. But regardless, there's something missing, and so the pre-think, I think, is absolutely critical as we think about how to support them and how to maintain kind of that as seamless. It's never seamless, but as seamless as possible transition.
Yep. It's so interesting to think about the reality that most organizations have a big hoopla when the person
Yep.
joins, and then we do absolutely nothing when the person leaves.
When's their last day? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think, I mean, there's a book literally called The First 90 Days. And I'm always like,
Right.
where's the
What about
last
the last
90 days?
90? Yeah.
Yeah. What about, I would be curious if you could kind of go way back. I mean, at this point, it feels like it's been forever since both of us were overseas with our families.
Mhm.
What correlations can you share with the folks watching around that prep and that planning, and why? Because it has just so stuck with me about when I left India, I was only going to be as good in our next spot, which was Singapore, as I was willing to say properly a goodbye to India, the people, the places, the things I learned. Could you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that?
Well, and you actually just mentioned a big part of it is to recognize the kind of the width of a departure. Uh, um, Dr. David Pollock, Michael Pollock's father, we did a lot of work in this and just really kind of set things up. And he always broke it into people, places, pets, and possessions. And especially for an overseas cross-cultural experience, when you're leaving, you're saying goodbye to more than the people, right? Like every restaurant that you go to that you've loved and you've spent time at with your friends, your family, there's going to be a last time that you go there. So make that intentional. Go there and be aware and be cognizant of the fact that this is our last time, and make something of it. Right. The pets, if you've got a pet, that's a big part of your life. Doesn't happen as much when you're not overseas and actually saying goodbye. But even the possessions, are there things in your office? Are there things that you engage with every day? The departure is from all of those, right? Like it's not just people. And so I think seeing it from that perspective is one big piece. The other thing that came to mind as you were kind of setting up that question is that there's like the situation carries a lot of weight. How are you leaving? What are the circumstances of your departure? Is it something that you've been planning for a year and you've made it public and you've done all of the right things and you've you've had the opportunity to go and do your farewells with everyone? Or did it happen quickly? Was it your choice or was it not your choice? Is it because of something happening inside of the organization or outside of the organization? Like my experience, we had several departures. Some of them we did really well, and others we didn't do as well. Some of that was on us, and other parts of that were from outside factors. The biggest example of that I ever saw was I worked with this organization that valued leaving more than any organization I've ever seen. I would go and do full day workshops with anybody who's leaving that year to prepare them for this experience and to help them do their farewells and leave well. That was great. And we set people up. And then when COVID hit, there was this mass departure of actually the organization was kind of forced into a position of saying, hey, we're going to actually get everyone out of China for 2 weeks
Mm.
and see what happens here, how this thing, hopefully it'll blow over by then, and then we'll bring you back and we'll be ready to go. Well, that 2 weeks never ended. And a lot of those people never were able to go back. Some of them, it extended months. Some of it extended over a year. And that's a very different departure. When your stuff is still sitting in your home and you've got to figure out how to get rid of it, when you didn't get a chance to say goodbye and spend those quality moments with the people that you've done life with, that's a different experience. And that's a cross-cultural overseas example, but I think it applies
Mhm.
regardless of where you are. The situation changes how you're able to and sometimes whether you're able to leave well. And there's a lot of different situational dynamics that can apply to that.
Yeah. I love that you focused on the whether it was your choice or not, because that is a huge piece of all of this, is if you're the one leaving versus someone telling you that it's your time to go. And I think that there's so many different emotions that come in. If it's your choice, then you feel guilty, or you feel like it was the wrong time, or maybe you should have waited longer or finished this project or what have you. Jerry, I want to go back to a long time ago, maybe 4 years ago at this point. We had a podcast conversation about ranking your friends. And I'm just remembering, because you would talk about, you do have to rank your friends and figure out what's the most important to you as you're leaving, because you can't give everyone equal weight. And I think that feels very applicable here too, when you are, if you know when you're going, not if it's sudden, but what projects get the highest ranking, what
Yeah.
relationship transfer gets the highest ranking. And I think that feels really important too. What would you say to the person who's watching who might feel like they don't have decision-making power or power at all as it relates to navigating, managing their own departure, or maybe it's the departure of others and they're the stayers, the people that stay behind?
Yeah, yeah. That's a big question, and I think it comes down to the narrative surrounding the departure, and there are kind of at least two different types of narrative that are happening. One is that internal narrative, like you're mentioning, like there's a conversation I'm having with myself about how much power I have here and how much control of the narrative I have and what I'm able to say, what I'm not able to say, who I'm able to connect with, who I'm not able to connect with. And then there's more of that public external narrative. And depending on the situation, there are people or a person or a board or an organization, like there's somebody who's kind of at least guiding and many times controlling that narrative. And so I think there's a hard spot to sit in between those two narratives, where we have to sit and we have to ask the questions and we have to surface those challenges, we have to surface those fears, we have to have the right conversations with the right people to say, hey,
Yeah.
how can we bring these narratives together? How can I make sure that I'm represented in this story that's being told and represented accurately, and what can we do about how that narrative goes out? That's a part of the process of leaving, right? Like if it's just an event, then it all happens in one day
Right.
and we're just gone, and then that narrative naturally takes shape depending on who's talking.
Yeah.
But if we look at it as a process, there are those conversations leading up to that, and we need to bring together the voices again and ask the hard questions and be able to shape that together.
Yeah. Well, and I just was writing down, like, narrative. I hadn't thought about this, but narrative, the shape of narrative is the same as culture. It's happening whether we
Yeah,
control it,
yeah,
contribute to it or not. And so
right.
I maybe the last question I'll ask you, Jerry, is around legacy and how it, I mean, it feels like it correlates a little bit to what you were just talking about with narrative. And I don't know if this is, your time overseas or your time with the agency that you were doing some work with, or something else. How do you view legacy in the relationship to leaving and departures?
Mm. One of the things that I always shared uh, when we would spend a day preparing to leave well, was that your issues can fly, right? So that's part of the hard part of not doing what David Pollock taught us to do with the reconciliation and kind of mending the relationships. And is that a lot of times our natural thinking is, I just can't wait to get out of here, because then all of this will be taken care of. But your issues go with you. You take them with you, and you still have to deal with those. And those relationships that are broken are still broken. But the flip side of that is that like your issues can also divide, and just because you take those issues with you doesn't mean you don't leave them there. And so you're always leaving a legacy, right? Like that you're always leaving something behind, because we're humans and we have memory, and you impacted things, and whether that is good or bad, there's legacy involved there. And so I think using that departure time, the process, the time around the end date, and even the time right after it, to pay attention to what is that legacy going to be, because um, a lot of impressions get made in that departure time. We think about
Mhm.
first impressions, right? We don't often think about last impressions. And a lot of times those last impressions are the pieces that people hold with them. That's how we're remembered. And so even a great legacy can be tainted on the end, and in the departure process, by some poor behavior that was driven by the stress of leaving, right? Or the stress of transition and what's coming next, right? Like those moments really, really matter. So paying attention to the moments, but also just stepping back and saying, what's the legacy that I want to leave here? And is that the legacy that's going to stay here
Yeah.
when I move on? And if not, is there anything that I can do right now, to help firm that up?
I love that. And that helps also answer the other question a little bit deeper of what happens if you're in a position that's not prioritized as one that's given a
Mm.
lot of resources for departure. You can still do what you just said, regardless. So thank you for that. Jerry, where can people find you and learn more about you and the work that you do and what you offer the world currently?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is a great spot. Just look me up on LinkedIn, and I'd love to connect with anyone out there who loves this conversation or anything surrounding it. That's a good place to start. I've got other things in motion. Some of them are fully formed and moving. Some of them are in process. So if you want to keep track of that or follow along, hit me up there.
Great. Jerry, thank you again, as always, for your insight and your perspective, and the fact that we can jump on a call and talk about who knows what at any point in time.
At any point, I
I
I
appreciate you.
always enjoy it. Thank you,
Yeah.
Naomi.
Thanks, Jerry.